We'll start with the perihelion precession with Mercury. And there's nothing too fancy here. The previous Newtonian theory of gravitation that they were using to explain the solar system apparently was unable to predict, under the Newtonian framework at that time, was unable to predict the perihelion precession observed by Urbain Le Verrier over the course of like 40 years. And then he mathematically extrapolated that if the precession continues over the course of a century, Mercury would precess by 5,600 arc seconds. So going back to that scale again, 5,600 arc seconds would be about a degree 0.25, so a degree and a quarter. They're saying over the course of 100 years, Mercury will shift in the sky by a degree and a quarter. And Newton was unable to explain that to the full degree. He could only explain 5,557 arc seconds per century. And Einstein was able to come up with the full effect, with the concept of space-time curvature and gravitational fields rather than mass attracting mass. And so let's see. There's nothing too crazy there. It's just a calculative prediction. So to give a representation of what that looks like, I drew this on paint. So here we have the sun. Here's the equator of the sun. Here's Mercury. Let's say every year that it goes by, it just moves up slightly. So over the course of 100 years, it moves up by 1 pixel. And Newton's theory was only able to explain a half pixel shift, while Einstein was able to explain the full pixel shift of Mercury, if that makes sense. And lower it. So how's that?
That's good.
All right. Cool. Is it clear enough?
Yeah, super clear.
All right, cool. Sorry about that. I apologize. Thank you, Dave, for clearing that up. All right. So let's see here. So picking up. So for Einstein, so for the perihelion precession, this problem or whatever so-called was known about for a while. In 17 years prior to Einstein's explanation, a man named Paul Gerber came up with a solution and a mathematical equation to explain it, but just under a different mechanism. His mathematic equation was representative of saying that the disturbance was caused by a perturbation of a gravitational wave, and the speed limit of that wave was set by the ether. And that was, then they had already moved on from the ether. So his explanation wasn't accepted as a viable explanation for Newton. So Einstein came along and used the exact same equation and just changed 2 symbols in it. The T symbol here. So what Einstein's contribution to the equation is he said, instead of taking the speed limit for C, all we need to do is take the total time of the orbit, like the time, right? And then just contract that. And with that contraction, we can make it meet C to get the prediction. So that's all he did, is like this capital T and this lowercase t. That's all the difference he did between those, is he just contracted the coordinate system to meet C. So that was his mechanism, and that was viably accepted. And then when called out for this plagiarism, Einstein's response he says, how could I have stolen from Paul Gerber if I have never seen his work? Just trying to downplay it or whatever. Even though he has a long history of plagiarizing things. And like, for example, prior to his 1905 publication of Special Relativity, he says that he had the way that he talks about the Michelson-Morley experiment is like he organically heard about it on his own, and he just decided to come up with the theory or based on that in the moving of dynamic, or the movement of magnets in capacitors, right? It's like that was his thing or whatever. But a couple years before he published that, he wrote to his wife in a private letter stating that he basically was going to study Lorentz's ether contraction explanation for the Michelson-Morley experiment and moving bodies and magnets and all that. And he was really interested in it, and he was going to get back to her. And then a couple years later, boom, Special Relativity comes out, and it's based on Lorentz transformations and adheres to Lorentz symmetry and all that. So, and he gives no credit to Lorentz in his published papers for his special theory. So, like, taking him on the face value of, did he just rip off Paul Gerber's explanation? Like, you be the judge. But these equations are identical, and the explanation is only varied by accepting the fact that the time would, it can vary, right? That's all he changed to facilitate the mechanism to describe the the Perihelion precession. It got to the point where they, because Miller's work couldn't be refuted, so people just, he stopped getting, jobs, and people stopped, like, publishing his work and, like, being interested in them and stuff, and they just kind of faded him out of existence. So, like,
Touche.
in the last years of his life, he was, like, all bitter and stuff because, nobody was trying to hear him on his 40 years of experimental proof that Einstein was, just making things up. And, yeah, it's kind of sad. And then they promoted the guy that lied about him. They gave him his position, dog, when he died. Like, it's so sad.
Yeah, it's crazy, bro. That sounds a lot like Tesla in a way.
Yeah, very similar story where you just have an absolute legend that just crushes everything, doesn't give a shit about, he doesn't care. He just wants to figure out, like, what's the best way to detect the thing that they were trying to do, right? That's all he cared about. And yeah, you just see how that was rewarded by the system.
But some dude that doesn't do any experiments at all is like famous.
Dude, yeah, that's the other part, man. The guy that never did any experiments. They're the guy who said experiment is king, quote from that guy.
Yeah.
And then he relies on, there was a couple instances like that quote that you pulled where Einstein was like, "Yeah, if Miller's, work is true, I'm toast." Like, he obviously knew about it and had no refutation to it, and the couple of times that he did try to refute Miller's work publicly, like in paper articles that you can reference and stuff, he attributed Miller's work to temperature differential effects. So, like, he clearly had no idea about anything that Miller was doing. Like, he wasn't reading. Well, he might have had an idea, but he wasn't going to admit that, obviously. So
Yeah, there you go.
his persona of it was just to act like he had never seen it, the same way he did with Paul Gerber, the same way he did with Lorentz's ether theory with ether contraction, and even used his entire framework and said that he had never thought of, or never seen it, and that he had thought of he had thought of this independently based on him hearing about Michelson-Morley and his thoughts on the experiment with a magnet and a conductor. So that
That
was
dude was just
his.
a liar, dude. Like,
Just lied
yeah,
all the time about everything, man.
crazy. Like he first says, "Well, I came across Michelson-Morley. It was puzzling." Blah blah. What's interesting is you said something about a secret letter he wrote to his wife. I definitely want to
Yep.
get my hands on that
I'm
and
about
see
to
if there's
pull it
like
up
an
and read it
original.
right now for everyone. We're about to read it.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Because then at the supposedly,
Wait,
apparently
dude.
the
That's
year,
none of
the
our
year,
business. What a secret
Yeah.
is. All right, go ahead.
I suppose apparently the year before he died, he wrote something to the effect of, "I don't think I was even familiar with or had ever heard of Michelson-Morley when I came up with special relativity." He said that the
Yeah.
year before he died.
Yeah, he's such a clown, dude.
Such a liar, dude. Like he intentionally lied. People are like, "Oh, maybe he just got old," or no, he's just a
No.
liar, dude. Just like he didn't say Henri Poincaré came up with the 4D space geometry. Like he just stole things and then lied. If someone called him out, he's like, "Oh, I didn't know about that."
Dude, Minkowski fixed his covariant situation by hyperbolically contracting time and space, with the geometric expression of space-time, so that all subsequent transformations would automatically be covariant. And Einstein was like, "Nah, fuck that. I don't understand it. That's gay." And he didn't want to use it. He wanted nothing to do with it because he wanted to come up with his own framework or whatever mathematically, and obviously couldn't do it. His wife had to step in and help him, and then they settled on using mathematical logical fallacies to establish pseudo tensors and everything for their framework. But yeah, it's all just gobbledygook.
Makes
Okay,
you think.
so
Good.
go ahead and then I'll read the letter.
Oh, no. Good first.
Good. Okay, let's see here. All right, I'm gonna screen share. 720p should be good enough. In case anyone wants to read along or whatever. This is from Hector Manera's paper 2006, a man who reproduced part of a group of men who reproduced Dayton Miller's work with a classic Michelson-Morley interferometer setup, and they over the course of 3 years, they reproduced the Miller's findings, where during the equinoxes, the fringe shifts reach their minimum and maximum dimensions on the day, of course, or in relation to the movement of the sun. So anyway, here's the paper where they talk about Einstein and Lorentz and special relativity and the theories involved. So Einstein occasionally made the statement that he did not know the results of the Michelson-Morley experiment before 1905. Quote, when I asked him, Einstein, how he had learned of the Michelson-Morley experiment, he told me that he had become aware of it through the writings of H.A. Lorentz, but only after 1905 had it come to his attention. Otherwise, he said, I would have mentioned it in my paper. So his mathematical theory that adheres to Lorentz symmetry, right, based on Lorentz's ether framework, where the mechanism of contraction and time dilation, or I don't think he dilated time, possibly, but anyway, the mechanism was direction of motion in the ether, and then space-time, the mechanism is no ether, just the motion, and the coordinate system contracts proportionally. Literally same framework, just different mechanisms for the explanation. So here he's saying otherwise he would have mentioned it in his papers. So he would have given credit to Lorentz had he used a theory based on his work that adheres to Lorentz covariance. So let's see here. So he would have mentioned it in his papers, emphasized in his original. This recollection by Einstein, contrary to his most recent documental evidence contained in Einstein's love letters, showing that Einstein was well aware of the Michelson-Morley experiment before 1905, both directly and indirectly, as follows. Indirect knowledge of Michelson-Morley experiment. Einstein read the work of Lorentz by the end of 1901 and in the beginning of 1902, as attested by letter 48 dated in Switzerland on December 28, 1901, where Einstein writes to Malivia, which is his wife, I want to get down to business now. I want to read what Lorentz and Drude, or what's his name? What's it? Drude or something? Druidude. Anyway, Lorentz and Drude have written about electrodynamics of moving bodies. Oh, his entire paper, 1905, titled "On the Motion of on the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies." Oh, no way. He was studying this. He wanted to get down to business on what Lorentz and this guy had said about moving bodies and electrodynamics. Interesting. Okay. So these books were written in 1895, Theory of Lorentz, citation 13, and in the 1900 optics book by Drude, the empirical basis for Lorentz's work was the negative interpretation of Michelson-Morley. Indeed, Lorentz was closely following Michelson's work right before the beginning, sending him a correction to his 1801 or 1818 experiment. So the Michelson-Morley experiment, there was one done in 1801 where the apparatus was too sensitive and they didn't get good readings or whatever. So they redid it in 1887 with corrections made to the apparatus where it was less sensitive to environmental effects. So most people don't really talk about the first one as anything. But yeah, Lorentz wrote him in that one and pointed out some stuff. And he also wrote him in the 1887 paper. Michelson cites a couple of quotes from Lorentz, and at the end of it, actually, the supplemental part is about Lorentz's critiques to it. So anyway, evidently, Lorentz continued quite worried about Michelson's negative results, as attested to the letter to Lord Rayleigh on 18 August 1892. Lorentz asked, can there be some point in the theory of Michelson's experiment, or can there be some point in the theory of Michelson's experiment which has yet been overlooked? In addition, Einstein learnt about Lorentz's work and its physical basis through Drude's book. The English translation of this book says in the introduction, chapter 8, that the ether always remains completely at rest. Upon this basis, H.A. Lorentz has developed a complete and elegant theory. It is essentially a theory which here represents the emphasis of the origins. So he already came up with an entire framework that adheres to his namesake, right? Lorentz covariance, right? So the relationship of transformations, keeping the laws of physics the same under transformation. This framework was established by him. That Einstein's special relativity theory explicitly adheres to. Direct knowledge of Michelson-Morley experiment. In the same chapter 8, Drude explicitly discusses the empirical evidence, including Michelson's 1881 experiment, in great detail. Whoa, we'll have to read that later. Didn't know that. And in 1887, the Michelson-Morley experiment in less detail, i.e., from Drude's work, Einstein learned about the constancy of the two-wave velocity in January 1901. But Einstein's previous information on the subject in letter 11, dated to Malua or Malayan in 28 September 1998, 1899, sorry. Einstein said, I read a very interesting paper by Wynne from 1898 on this subject. Wynne's paper describes the experiments related to the detection of motion of Earth's relative to the ether. Oh, no way. The Michelson-Morley experiments is in the list of the 10 experiments with negative results. The explicit
Whoa! I want that. I want that list. Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
we'll get that citation. Absolutely. See, that's the deal. That's why I love going through these and going through the citations at the end, because there's always so much gravy in these. Absolutely. So let's see. So the Michelson-Morley experiment is on a list of 10 negative results. This explicit test is if the ether is at rest, then the time of the light ray needs to travel back and forth between the two glass plates must change if the plates are moving with the velocity of v. The change depends on the quantity v squared times a squared. A is the reciprocal of the speed of light, but should be observed by application of interferometry, but should be observable by the application of interferometry. The negative result is incompatible with the assumption of an ether at rest. Oh, no way. The assumption can only be maintained by means of hypothesis that the linear dimensions of a rigid body are altered by the motions of a resting ether in the same ratio so as to compensate for the lengthening of the path of the light ray. End quote. Hence, Einstein read about the negative interpretation of the Michelson-Morley experiment as least as early as September 1899. Foregoing new evidence casts serious doubts on the conventional view propounded by Holton. The role of Michelson-Morley was minor in the genesis of special relativity theory. It is clear that Einstein knew, at least since 1899, that according to experimental evidence, the two-way speed of light was independent of the direction, and such a fact necessitated appropriate physical explanation.
Wow, that is fire. Dude, hit your boy with that paper.
So that's your boy from Monera's paper.
Okay.
Yeah. Did I already send you that one or nah? Not sure. I'll send it again.
No, let me look at the 3 I have.
I just sent it. But yeah, a little historicity of the fraudulence of that, man. So if we remember back to a couple hours ago when we were learning about the Perihelion precession and Paul Gerber, a man who 17 years prior to Einstein's solutions used the exact same equation under a different mechanism. And then Einstein comes along and uses Paul Gerber's equation under a different mechanism and just completely co-opts his work and says that the Perihelion precession is a relativistic effect, even though mathematically it was equivalently described 17 years earlier under Newtonian dynamics and an ether framework.
Wow, dude. This is crazy. And then it says it has a list of 10 experiments trying to detect the motion that were all negative.
Yeah, I'm about to go look those up real quick. So let's see. That was citation. So Wynn's paper, citation 16. Go all the way down here. Bottom. Hit up your boy 16. Oh, cool. It's in a different language. No worries. Your boy has an AI that'll translate it. Let me just find it, and then it'll become ours.
Yeah, I need that too, man. It was so funny is too when you look into like the Germans, it's like they were strictly ether physics. So it's like Einstein was just real deal an outcast. He had to get out.
Yeah, well, they ended up, using his fake framework as a shield to hide actual physics and obscure like real effects as relativistic effects that have no physical meaning. Because Germany was one of the first people to stop academically critiquing or put a gag order on academically critiquing Einstein from like 1921 or whatever it was. I'm sure you've heard of it, the 1,000 authors against Einstein or whatever kind of thing. So there's
Yep.
it's actually 3,000, and there's like different papers and excerpts and articles that people wrote in and submitted to their respective academic publishers at the time, and they all got denied. But there's a big collage of it. I have a PDF of that as well. I can look for. I can't remember the title of it. I was reading it the other day. But yeah, it's like 3,000. They shut it down in like 1921. They were like, you can no longer critique Einstein, boys. They stopped publishing it.
Wow.